Hi guys, it's Sam here from Sam Strings. Today I'm going to demonstrate a one-piece stringing method using the around the world process. So to start the racket, you're going to need a short side and a long side. For my short side, you're going to need enough strings for 7 mains and 1 cross string. And then for your longer side, you're going to need enough string for everything else. So that will be 8 mains plus all your crosses. So to begin the process, we're going to start at the throat of the racket on this Wilson Clash version 2. So I'm going to pull tension on both strings, clamp it up with my starting clamp and lever pad, and then we're going to pull full tension on the first main string on the left side of the racket. Such as that. The left side is actually going to be my longer piece of string, so at the beginning it can feel like you've got a lot of string to deal with, but it's fine. One thing you can do is just to make sure you hold the edge of the string. It means you haven't got to keep finding the end of the string every time you pull a string. So we're just going to pull one more main string, which will be number 3 on the left side of the frame. And then, as we only like to sort of move 2 or 3 strings ahead when doing the mains, I'm going to go back to my first main string on the right side of the racket. So pulling tension, removing the lever pad and the starting clamp. That's number 1. But now we're going to go up to the 5th main string on the right side of the frame. For this racket, which is a Wilson Clash version 2, I'm using a multifilament string, Wilson Sensation, which is pretty popular, at least for me, and we're pulling it at 55 pounds tension. I believe this client suffers with a little bit of tennis elbow, so the frame and the string help just to soften things up a little bit, so there's not too much vibration going on. So that's the 4th main. So I'm just going to do one more on the right side of the frame. That's number 5. And now back to the longer side, we're going to go all the way up to the 8th and last main string. So in terms of like when a one-piece stringing method can be better and what the benefits are, I think firstly, from like a stringer's perspective, they're using less string. So I'm only using 10 meters of string for this frame, where if I was stringing it with 2 bits of string, I'd probably be using close to 11 meters, so probably up to 1 meter more string. So if you have reels of string like me, saving a little bit of string in every frame is obviously helpful. You'll get more rackets per reel of string, and you'll make a little bit more money that way, which is always nice. So we're just going to go up to the last main string. There's a couple of skipped holes in this frame, so we skip 7 and 9 on this frame. last one. Now we're going to move back to the short side of the frame. We're only going to go up to the 7th main string, so we're not going to go down to the 8th one, and I'll explain why in a minute, and you'll begin to see why this is called the around the welds method. So we're just going to go up to the penultimate main string, which is number 7, and we're going to pull tension as normal. Now, instead of going back down to the last main string, we're actually going to come back across, and we're going to go across the first cross string at the head of the racket. And this bit here is really important. So your natural instinct will be to release this clamp here and hold tension here. But you can't do that when doing the one-piece method, because if you release the clamp here, you're going to lose tension all across here, and you'll essentially have to start again. So instead of using your clamp here, you're going to pull tension as normal. And then we're going to use our starting clamp and lever pad once more. That's going to hold tension for us. Now, we're going to go back to the bottom of the frame. And there's another important bit here to mention as well, which I'll explain in a second. Let's get this through. So, because this is an odd amount of cross strings, so we've got 19 cross strings, we need to make sure that the first cross string and the bottom cross string are the same weave. So, for example, this here, the cross string's gone under. I need to make sure it's gone under at the bottom as well. This ensures that you're not going to have a double weave at the bottom of your string bed. If it's an even amount of cross strings, like an 18 by 20, you'll do the reverse. You'll have to make sure that your top string and your bottom string are weaved differently. So if this one went over, then your corresponding bottom string would go under. That way you're not going to get any misweaves. I've made that mistake a few times, and you essentially have to start again, which is frustrating. So these are the same, just going to double check, which they are. So we're going to pull our bottom cross string, and you'll start to see the around the welds pattern. So we've come across, we've come down, we've gone back across, and then we're going to go up again, so around the weld. So I'm going to pull tension on the bottom cross, and it's fine to clamp this now because we're holding tension with the starting clamp. Then we're going to go back off our last main string on the other side. Now we're back at the head of the frame. So the reason why we do this method is because you're then stringing the cross strings from the heads to the throat of the racket, rather than from the throat to the head of the racket, which is much better for the frame. You always want to be stringing from the head of the racket. As this is a softer string, I'm just trying to get the string through a blocked hole at the top. Once more. I was trying to go below the grommet, but I think we're just going to go above the grommet because there's more space. There we go, that's much easier. Now we're just going to go one string ahead as normal. So I'm going to weave cross 2, which I've done. Now we're going to weave cross 3 as well quickly. Just want to do that. Then we're going to pull tension on our second cross string. And again, it's fine to clamp this now because we've still got the starting clamp in place. And then we're going to do tension on the third cross string as well. As the clamp here is blocking the fourth cross, I'm just going to pull tension on number 3 before going back one string ahead. So now I'm going to go back one string ahead, so I'm going to weave cross strings 4 and 5. That's number 4. And then number 5. Now that we've got both cross strings clamped down, I'm actually going to go back and tie off the knot at the head of the racket. So I'm just going to over pull tension by a few pounds. So I've gone up from 55 to 58 pounds. Put my tension back down. And then we're going to tie off at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th hole at the head of the racket. And we're going to use a parnell knot here, so we're going to do a single hitch, leave the hole available, and then back through the hole, and then we're just going to take out any slack from the knot, make sure it's nice and tight, and then pull the rest of the string through. Now I've put the tension back down to 55 pounds, and we're going to pull tension on the 4th cross string. So as mentioned earlier, some of the benefits of doing this method: number 1, you use less string, which is good. Number 2, you're only tying off 2 knots rather than 4, so if you're going to lose, you can get a loss of tension through your knots if they're not done properly. So again, 2 knots rather than 4, in theory, should have less tension loss. But if you're stringing your rackets and tying the knots professionally, then it's not too much of an issue. Another good time to use it is for smaller head sizes that have a high amount of string. So maybe like 90 square inches or 95 square inches that has an 18 by 20 string pattern. It can look a bit neater with a single piece of string rather than 2, because you have a bit more space to tie off the knots, and it just looks a bit tidier from the outside of the frame as well. Then in comparison, when not to use this method, stating the obvious, but obviously hybrid stringing requires 2 separate pieces of string. Any rackets that contain shared holes, like the head's speed, for example, is not possible to do with a single piece of string. Also, rackets where you're stringing 2 different tensions, so one for the mains and a different tension for the crosses, I'd always use a 2-piece method for that, rather than using 1 piece of string to put at different tensions, which doesn't make too much sense. but the vast majority of rackets can be strung in 1-piece or 2-piece these days, so it's all about personal preference, I think. But it's not something my clients ever really instruct me to do, if they prefer a 1-piece or 2-piece, but I think at a professional level maybe that is the case. So we're just going to string the rest of our cross strings as normal, working from the heads down to the throat of the frame. So once you get to this part of the frame, it really is no different from any other stringing method. The only thing we need to make note of is when we get to the second from last cross string, which will be your final cross string, because we've already crossed the first one. There's just a few things just to make you aware of once we get down there. I typically used to always string using the 2-piece method. I think because I was more familiar with it when I first started stringing, and perhaps found it a bit easier perhaps, but more recently where I can, I tend to use a 1-piece if it's the same string tension, and if the frame allows it, then I will use a 1-piece just to save that important bit of string, so I can get a racket or maybe 1.5 rackets more out of my ruler string. It definitely helps me. And maybe it's slightly quicker as well, only having to pull 2 knots rather than 4. There will be some frames where if you're using the 1-piece method, it will ask you to string it from a particular side. So the short side will usually be specified on the frame. It might have SL and LS for short side and long side. So yeah, just be conscious of that before attempting to use this method, to make sure there's no predefined long and short sides of the frame. If there are, just make sure you follow the guidelines on the frame. But they'll always be marked out on the frame somewhere. So not many cross strings to go now. This frame is a brand new Wilson Class version 2, like I said before, so I thought it made sense to showcase it in the video as well, because it looks nice while it's all nice paintwork, no scratches, no chips, etc. So this is the last cross string where I can go one ahead, so as I'm getting a bit tight on string, I'm going to do the last 3 strings just by putting them one by one. So when you get to your second to last cross string, if you've done it right, it should be the same weave as the bottom string. So here I've gone under, and the bottom string is under as well, because then the last cross string, which will be the second from last in the frame, will then be the opposite to that, so it won't be misweaved. So up to the last cross string. Again, I'm going to over pull this one, so I'm going to set it to 58. And luckily for me, it's all worked out and there's no misweaves, which is good. Just going to do a final check to make sure that the entire racket has been weaved properly. So I'm just going to run my finger down the string just to make sure it goes under, over, all the way down. So all good. Now, for the last cross string, I'm actually going to pull tension once and then release it, and then I'm going to over pull to 58, just because sometimes it's going against the grain and you don't want your second string to feel looser than the one at the bottom. So that just makes sure that it feels nice and tight. So make sure you clamp on your second to last cross string and not the bottom one out of habit. I've done that before as well. And then you'll basically not pull tension on your last cross string. So yeah, it's a good mistake not to make that one. Always make sure you finish on your second cross string. And to tie the knot, I'm just going to put the stringing machine flat to make it a bit easier for myself. And then we're just going to, also doing this method gives you a few more options to tie off. So you can either tie off in the main, what would have been the main tying hole, or you can tie off in the cross tying hole. So just gives you a bit more flexibility. So I'm tying off in what would be the main cross hole. Let me just give it a snip. As this racket is new, the grommets are still a little bit snug, so. And the string is a bit soft, which doesn't make it any easier. There we go. Tying off in the main, it would have been the main tying hole, means that on the side of the frame, it looks really nice and neat, the way it just goes under. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's super nice and neat down there. You don't want any crossed over string on the outside of the frame. It doesn't look good. And then again, I'm just going to use the parnell knot. So single hitch, repeated, and then I'm going to pull the string through the available hole that I've left. Then I'm just going to use my starting clamp, same as before, just to put it nice and tight, and then pull the remainder of the string through. Now that I've done that, I'm just going to release my clamps. And then we're just going to snap the ends off, so make it look nice and neat. And then finally, I'm just going to use the setting off awl just to make sure the strings are nice and straight. As most stringing machines tend to pull the cross strings at a slight curve, it's just good habit just to make sure all of the cross strings are nice and straight, but not to obsess over it at the same time, because every time you do this, you're essentially knocking a bit of tension out of the string. So I'm happy with that. And then just to release it from the frame. And there you have it. That's the one piece around the world stringing method. All looks super nice and neat.